Okay. Um, I am sorry for the past few days of having my sleep pattern a bit out of whack, but yeah, originally I wanted to do my Technical Tuesday show here on Russian tanks, as Russia is basically our other very large enemy apart from China, who I did on the last Technical Tuesday stream that I did. So this time I wanted to do Russian tanks, as I can literally do a Technical Tuesday stream basically every Tuesday from here till Kingdom Come, because there's so many different types of military vehicles in existence, and weaponry, missiles, small arms. I mean, literally any category of military arms and weaponry that exists that I could literally go over the technical specifications of. And before I even get into that, um, I'm aware that that not everybody finds these interesting. This is just my nerdy pastime that I do for other people that essentially can appreciate these types of things, or at least that want to learn of these types of things. But before I even go into that, I did want to at least say this much. I did want to say that um, yes, I have been immensely busy on my other projects, especially my main one that I have coming up, which is the internal Second American civil conflict, Syrian style civil conflict. By Syrian style, again, I mean factional conflict. It's hypothetical, and it's just a hypothetical scenario, and the purpose of which is to convey uh, very important aspects of what comprises such a situation in the first place, and how those situations can very easily develop, as far as how factions go and how factions develop and how factions work, how they grow, who leads them, how they come to lead them, so on and so forth. That is the main thing I'm trying to convey with such a hypothetical scenario. And I may even, get a move on putting out my first video of that documentary series, because it is going to be a large documentary series. I mean, it's going to take a lot more than one live stream to be able to put out what I want to put out with that, because it's very, very extensively detailed. I literally am breaking down the socioeconomic, socio-financial, military, and moral decay, societal decay, and how that figures into it. Just every aspect conceivable. I mean, even infrastructure, even how that plays a role. Logistics, because logistics are everything in any type of armed conflict. You cannot have a military operation if you don't have the logistical support to back it up. Because I don't think people understand how armies even work. Armies don't just get up and willy-nilly conduct operations. I mean, it takes a lot of fuel, a lot of parts for vehicles, a lot of technical experts and expertise, a lot of training, a lot of ammunition, a lot of everything, transport, all of it that figures in to military operations. And with that, I think that I'm going to now begin with today's topic on Russian tanks. Again, as I said in the last one, when it comes to armored warfare and tanks, um, I think the most relatable thing I can use to other people to convey these concepts is the wars in Iraq, because most Americans at least remember a little bit about what all those wars entailed. And I mean Desert Storm, as well as the invasion. Not the counterinsurgency operations that followed the invasion, although tanks were used in those, but they were used in more of a police action type of concept, rather than mobile warfare, against another army, which is what tanks are actually made for, army on army fighting. Although they do, yes, they do serve as good vehicles for counterinsurgency operations, but they are primarily intended for mobile warfare. So with that, I'm going to use that as a metric for discussing these Russian tanks. Now, when I went to Iraq, I was part of the coin operation, or also known as the counterinsurgency operation part of Iraq, because I went there from 07 to 09. And I went as advanced party, so I got to spend even more time there than the rest of our unit did. All the advanced party guys that went got an extra couple months on their tour from the rest of our unit. So I was really the Army had 15-month tours when I went. So when I went, I was really there closer to about 18 months. I want to say it was 18 months, give or take a few weeks. But yeah. So I was over in the Middle East for a long time, and I was able to see a whole lot and experience a whole lot while I was there. A lot of it really bad, but there were some unique experiences, downright educational experiences, because I'm a historian. I love ancient history all the way to modern history, and more. There were weird experiences. There was a little bit of something in between. So, I mean, Iraq was a whole number of different experiences. I can't say that it was all bad or all good or all mundane or any. It was a whole ton of things wrapped together. And I am a combat soldier, and I did see combat. There were times where it was slow, and there were times where it was heavy, and there were times when we had downtime. There were times where it was balls to the walls, get up and move and go, the whole 9 yards. So Iraq, being that I was there for about a year and a half, I got to experience the whole gamut of different experiences, including combat, intense combat too. It wasn't just like, you fire like 2 rounds and you're done. No, this was intense combat. But it was only, thank God, just a handful of situations, and it wasn't, basically the whole entire time balls to the walls. There were times where it was, but most of the time it was sort of, it was just different other things going on. Anyways, yeah, but back to the invasion part. When you think of Saddam Hussein's regime and Saddam's army, you think of a depleted force that basically ended up, I don't know why somebody's calling me. No. Okay, anyway. Yeah, you think of a depleted military that was essentially using tanks that a lot of which were left over from the long Iran-Iraq war, and we're still using some of the same old parts that had been basically haphazardly maintained over the years. The same guns that hadn't been switched out in many cases, which means that they were worn down and ineffective. And they ended up abandoning a lot of those tanks. But by the time we invaded Iraq, a lot of them were used as decoy tanks, like I mentioned in my last stream, or they were like basically used as emplaced artillery positions. Even though tanks are not made to be artillery, they are made for mobile warfare, where they're made to maneuver on the battlefield and maneuver around other vehicles, other units, even maneuver around fortifications and attack from different angles. They're made to hit basically a whole gamut of different targets, be they other vehicles, supply lines of your enemy, if you can get behind the battle lines, basically logistics, supply lines, I just said, fortifications, and everything in between, infantry, all of it. So, because tanks use a variety of different rounds, they're able to attack a variety of different targets. They are not made to be stationary, sitting ducks to where they themselves can be easily maneuvered around and destroyed. Now, if you understand the size of the Iraqi military in Desert Storm versus what it was when we invaded, basically what it was when we invaded, by that time it was just a shadow of its former self in the 90s, in the early 90s, and it had really become even more depleted, making it even easier for Iraq to be defeated in that war and taken over and occupied. But we were really fighting just basically a nothing military by the time that 2003 came around, and it was time that the Saddam's regime was overthrown. But in the 90s, early 90s, 1990, 91, in the Gulf War, you had a large military that literally just completed a long war with Iran. In the 80s, the Iran-Iraq war. So some of their equipment was still relatively new that they had bought in the later stages of that war, although some of it had been worn down over the years of fighting, and they, due to their enormous debt, were unable to buy a lot of spare parts in order that they could maintain them in prime fighting condition. Now, also, they bought a lot of export models of these old Soviet tanks that they had in the, left over from the 80s. And one of those Soviet tanks was the T-72. Of course, they had a lot of T-54, 55s. Whenever you see the T-54 or the T-55, you'll see it say T-54/40. T-54/55, because they're basically, for all intents and purposes, the same series of tank. They've had some upgrades in different armies because many of the world's armies use those. I think that was actually, if it wasn't the most produced tank in all of history, it's definitely up there, because there were many tens of thousands of those produced. I don't have the exact number. I forgot to write that down because I only intended on talking about the tanks that the Russian army actually employs now, which the tanks that the Russian army has actively employed in their forces and reserves. They have 12,500 active or available battle tanks for frontline service. They have 9,000 T-72s, and those are of the B or B3 variety. They have, and I think they're mostly by now have all been converted to the B3 series. They have 3,000 T-80 series tanks, and most of those are the BVM, which is the latest iteration of the T-80. But I still think they have some U's left, if I'm not mistaken, T-80Us, but most of them are BVM. But the older series of T-80 were the B and BV varieties before the T-80U, and then now the most recent BVM. And not as common as the T-72, which they have 9,000 of. The T-80, they have about 3,000 of, and in their service. And they have also the T-90 MS, which is converted from the T-90S to the MS category, which is their most up-to-date iteration of the T-90, and they have about 500 of those in their active service. Although there have been plenty of more of T-90s produced, for whatever reason, Russia has preferred to export those to other nations. Now, although it's been several thousand additional T-90s produced, there are an additional 1,000 to 2,000 that are licensed, built in India. And those, I believe, are of the T-90M variety or the T-90A. I could be mistaken. Maybe India has the S by now, but they don't have the MS. That's strictly a Russian configuration, the most up-to-date iteration of the T-90. Now the Russians have 500 of these, and they also they have the Armata, the T-14 Armata. Now that is their newest tank, and I'm not able to find a lot of information on the Armata, so I apologize for that. I only wrote down the little factoids I was able to dig up, which wasn't very much, but I'm going to at least read off what I'm able to about those before it's all said and done. And as far as I'm aware, the exact numbers are classified of how many that Russia has actually produced and fielded, but estimates range as low as 75 to as high as 200 as of this year. So yeah, that's a pretty complicated tank, and it's basically, as far as its technological properties, is up there with the Chinese Type 99A tank, which is China's most modern battle tank. Now, China also has the Type 96B, which the 96B iteration of the Type 96 is basically their other very modern tank, which is closer in comparison. Like if you're comparing Russian and Chinese tanks, the Type 90 MS of the Russians, it fits into a similar metric as the Type 96B of China does, and the T-14 Armata that Russia has fits into a similar metric as, say, like the Chinese Type 99A, which is China's most up-to-date, latest tank with the most technological innovations. So anyways, Russia also has quite a substantial amount of boneyard tanks, which is a form of storage, although most of those tanks that Russia has in the boneyards are not in a working condition. They're basically just rust buckets that are there to either cannibalize spare parts for, because remember, Russia has a huge amount of T-72 tanks, and some of the parts for the T-72s Russia has now, like the B-3s, some of the parts on the original T-72s, about 800 of them are sitting in that or in those boneyards. Some of the parts are interchangeable, and the Russians save a lot of money on their defense budget by cannibalizing parts from their tank graveyards. So, also another interesting factoid as it pertains to the boneyards, Russia did actually manage to cannibalize some of the old types, or I'm sorry, T-64s. It's not China. China calls everything type. Russia calls theirs the the T tanks. So Russia cannibalized a bunch of T-64s, basically the old 64M, and a lot of those just got retired not that long ago. About in the 2000 teens, the last of the T-64 M series tanks were retired. So what Russia did was they took even older T-64 parts and they integrated those into the recently retired T-64Ms, and they were able to fix some of those up and give those to the DPR and LPR proxy forces in eastern Ukraine as a way to replenish whatever tank losses they lost. So when people say crazy things about the Russian tank fleet being low on tanks, what they're actually thinking probably is what they're doing is they're looking at Ukrainian propaganda, which is outright lies, like how they use Russian tank museum footage and other, crazy asinine made up, lies that they peddle, because they have Western propagandists working for them and developing propaganda for them. But also, what they're doing is they're looking at these proxy forces of Russia, which these are not actual Russian forces. These are proxy forces that are fighting alongside the Russians, because they have been fighting in eastern Ukraine since 2014. So Russia has replenished their losses with the older tanks that they've repaired from their boneyards that were recently retired from the Russian military. Now, Russian tank losses, interesting enough, are more comparable to what we've lost over the course of the Iraq and Afghanistan occupations to, say, like roadside munitions that destroyed some of our tanks or other situations of combat. we all in all we lost a few hundred tanks over the entire 20-year period that we occupied Afghanistan, and about the 10-year period of Iraq. And I say 10 years because, we still had some troops there even after we officially left in 2011. So yeah, in the past 20 years of our war in the Middle East and Central Asia, we have lost a few hundred Abrams tanks. And Russia has lost comparatively similar as far as what their Ministry of Defense is admitting to. They've lost a few hundred main battle tanks, and most of those are of the T-72 variety. So, yeah, so for expediency's sake, even if they have 200 or so of the new T-14 Armata tanks, those would at least keep their tank numbers at 12,500 main battle tanks available for service, because those tanks would end up just standing in for whatever tanks they lost anyway. And even if they did want to replace those lost T-72s largely, which is most of their tank losses were T-72 tanks, of the few hundred that Russia actually did lose, which isn't a whole lot of tanks. It's not anything close to what Ukraine, the crazy statistics that are totally half baked that they're putting out there as propaganda. But if Russia did really want to replace those tanks and save money doing it, besides the new tanks that they're fielding, they could easily just go into their boneyard tanks, take out some of those 800 T-72s that maybe weren't cannibalized, or maybe some of the ones that were, and swap out parts with other ones, and just rebuild those tanks that they lost. I mean, they have 800 T-72s just sitting in the boneyards. So, I mean, it's not like it's a big thing for them to just dip into that and rebuild some tanks out of the older tanks that are just sitting there collecting rust. So, yeah, I mean, we do a lot of similar things with our Abrams tanks. We send a lot of tanks to Lima, Ohio, that end up getting refurbished or have new modifications put onto them. And Lima is also where they're even built from scratch. But if we have like older M1 Abrams, like these Marine Corps tanks that are in storage, they've already sent small batches of them to the Lima plant to try to upgrade them and return them to storage, so that they'll have M1A2 tanks that are sitting in storage instead of older M1A1 tanks that the Marine Corps used to have. So yeah, it's not that dissimilar in that concept if Russia wanted to do similar with their boneyard stuff, which is also, like I said, a form of storage. They could easily do that. Now, to get down to the brass tacks, I'm going to talk about the technical specifications, and I'm going to start with the T-72. Now, when I did the one on the Chinese tanks, I talked about their older upgraded stuff, and the T-72 would be, I guess, some of Russia's older and upgraded stuff as well, because basically the old Chinese Type 59 and 69 and 79 tanks, those are older but upgraded platforms, much like the T-72 is for Russia, which, all in all, has about similar capabilities to the old Chinese tanks. Although they have modernized the newer iterations to where they have, they've always had the same type of gun, but like at 125 millimeters of smoothbore, but it's a depressed gun as far as the up and down traversing of it, which limits their shot, as well as the type of smoothbore gun. Even the type that's on it now, which is a better design than its original 125 smoothbore. It's called the 2A46M or 2A46M5 gun. Which is basically the newest smoothbore gun that it has on it, compared to the original T-72s. The original T-72s had a different 125 millimeter smoothbore, but the newer one is better than the original. But it still has the issue of a sort of a depressed up and down traverse. So where it's about 15 degrees, which limits its shot abilities out to about 4,000 meters, which is 4 kilometers, which is not very far. It's about 3 miles. Now, the Chinese tanks with their 105 elongated rifled tank gun with the bigger bores that can launch ATGMs. Now, keep in mind, this T-72 also can launch ATGMs that are wider than the Chinese ones, because the Chinese ATGMs for their old tanks that have the 105 millimeter, they're of course more narrow at a 105 millimeter diameter, but the Russian ones shoot a 125 millimeter ATGM. Now, the newer Chinese tanks with the 125 millimeter shoot very similar types of ATGMs to what all the Russian tanks can. Now, all the Russian tanks are 125 millimeter smoothbore as their primary guns. Now, there's different iterations of that gun, as the T-80 tank has a different type of 125 millimeter gun than the T-72 and T-90 have. Now, with the T-90, you have a lot of similar features from the T-90 as you did on the T-72. The T-90 essentially was modeled from the T-72 in a lot of categories, only it is a heavier tank and it's a bit slower, but it has more technology in it. Now, the T-80 is a tank that was built off of the old T-64 tanks. Similar design features with those two series of tanks. They're like competing series of Russian tanks, the 64 and 80 series and the 72 and 90 series. They're made by two different places, but they might look similar in appearance, but they're not. They're actually very different tanks. The 64 and 80 series and the 72 and the 90 series. Those two lines of tanks are very divergent lines of Russian tanks, and I'm going to explain some of that in more detail with the technical stuff. Again, the guns are different. The guns are different on the 72. The 72 and the 90, the T-90, have the same gun. They both have the 2A46M guns, and the T-80 has a 2A46M1 gun, which is a bit different than the 2A46M5 and I'm sorry, the 2A46M and M5, whereas the 2A46M1 is a bit different. That's on the 80. But anyways, the T-72, it also has a 7.62 by 54 millimeter coax, which is the same with like Chinese tanks too, like I said in the last Technical Tuesday stream. And they also have a 12.7 millimeter turret gun, just like the Chinese tanks. Very, very similar in a lot of regards. And the engine is a V12 diesel V-9252F 1,130 horsepower engine. Now, the original T-72 had 780 horsepower, which is considerably less than what the B3M has. The B3M has a whole new power pack. So the range is 290 miles. And this is on road, okay? It's 290 miles on road, and on road with extra tanks added. It has extra fuel tanks that can be attached to the back of it. It's 430 miles. So it gets quite a lot of range with the extra fuel tanks. The armor is steel and composite armor, which it has layering in it, which the original armor was essentially quartz and sand, which was sandwiched between the steel armor to protect it from basically shape charge ammunition. Although it wasn't all that great, as was found out in the first Gulf War, when the Iraqi tanks, which were basically the original T-72 export models, basically were annihilated by even 105 millimeter shells from the tank guns of the day, like on the M60A3 tanks, like I explained in the last one, how the improved Chinese 105 millimeter gun that was built off the L7 and improved can go through basically any type of tank armor if the original L7 gun, which isn't improved, which was what was on the M60, could have penetrated T-72 armor back in the Gulf War. Now, if you pair different ammo types, there's ammo types that really increase the lethality of the tank guns. It's all about the ammo type. It's all about if the tank has modern computing systems like ballistic computer fire control systems, and if it has, IR and NVG capabilities or not, which, like the original T-72s only had the Luna IR searchlight system, which was the original type of infrared type of system. Now that has a newer infrared system. It's got it's called something like the, hold on, I got it written here. It's called the Catherine XP infrared identification system, or target identification system. And that is in the new T72B3M, and it's also in the T90MS. So basically, they use this this IR system it's housed in a suite and it replaces what the Luna IR searchlight once was, which was for painting a target to where they could look through goggles and see the target painted with this searchlight. But you would have to get the target in the searchlight and paint it with the searchlight to be able to see it. Then you'd have to aim. But now it's all computerized. So now the T-72 has a stabilized gun, whereas the first models don't. Like I said in the last live stream about on Technical Tuesday about Chinese tanks, when I said that the original T-72s couldn't fire on the move accurately, which is the Russian tanks that I'm talking about now. But I said that on the Chinese tank video because I was talking about how the old Chinese tanks now have stabilized guns too, and that's like common stuff in this day and age. But both China and Russia have a tendency to modify older equipment like that to keep it very lethal, very up to date. And the T-72 is no exception, which I'm talking about right now. That's fully computerized. It's fully kept up with modern technology, with its computerized ballistic computer and its GPS and its stabilized gun system and its infrared and night vision capabilities. It is NBCR protected, of course. That goes for not just the T-72s now, but also the T-80s and the T-90s, and also, of course, the T-14. And with the steel composite armor, where I was speaking on armor, it can also have explosive reactive or applique armor added, which is like the Contact 5 armor, which is explosive reactive armor that can go on the T-72 and T-80, and also as an option for the T-90, even though they have even better armor called the Relict system. I'm sorry, I might have wrote that wrong. It's some kind of Russian name. It's, hold on, it's like Relict or I can't pronounce it. Anyways, the T-80 is the next tank that I'm going to go. Oh, and before I finish with the T-72, it is an auto-loading tank. It has an auto-loader. Just wanted to say that. Even the originals had an auto-loader. That was innovative for its time, and it still has an auto-loader. That's very popular with Russian tanks especially. Now, the T-80UM has even more technology integrated into it, and that is the next tank I'm going to discuss. It also has literally like the same weapons as the T-72, with the stable, Relict, that's right. that relict system is the ERA, the explosive reactive armor option that goes on the T80 or T90. Contact 5 is most popular with the T72s because it's cheaper and it's more readily available. But the T80 has the relict armor upgrade added to it. Anyways, it also has a stabilized gun system, a 125 millimeter gun as well, but it's the 2A4M1 gun that goes on the T80 here, which is the most common T80 iteration besides just the plain T80U. And it has, as far as engines, it has the SG-1000 gas turbine engine, or it has the GTD 1250 turbine engine. And newer T80 iterations have 1,250 horsepower with the GTD 1250 engine. The original T80s had 1,000 horsepower with the SG-1000 gas turbine. On the road, it has 208 miles of a range, and with the tanks, with the external fuel tanks, it has 258 miles on the road. So, yeah, it's got substantially less mileage than the T72 B3M, which has a lot more range. I'm sorry, not mileage. I mean, well, yeah, mileage, range, same thing. It's got extensively less range than the T72, which is the T72 is a lighter tank than the T80 which has a lot more weight to it. It's a gas guzzler, but it can its maximum speed is 50 miles an hour. On road and off road is 30 miles an hour. I forgot to read you the max speed of the T72 before I ended there. Its max speed is about 47 miles an hour, so it's pretty close in speed, but it's a lighter vehicle. It has more range, uses less fuel overall than the T80, but the T80 has a more modernized it has a more modernized computing system on board, and the IR suite. It has the CATS Drost active protection system too, which is similar to the Chinese systems. How I mentioned how they have not just the smoke grenade systems, but they also have the systems for intercepting what are they called? Projectiles and things like that. It's something similar to that. And they also have it's all integrated into a computer system that can be activated as soon as commands are given, or if the computer senses incoming rounds or lasing, because it can detect lasing basically. Like say if an M1 Abrams is lasing the T80, the sensors can detect that, and it can inform the crew so they can make informed decisions, or it can the actual active protection part can engage some of the projectiles with projectiles basically. It has a Buron Catherine IR suite on it, and that's only in the newest T80 iteration of the T80. The older iteration used a different infrared system, but as I said, those are different tanks than the T72s and the T90 series of tank. The T80 was built off of the T64 platform. It has more similarities, I should say, to the T64 platform than it does with the T72 and T90. Now the T90 is the next tank I'm going to go to. That tank has basically it has all the same features as far as the gun stabilizing and everything. Oh, shit. Okay, sorry about that. My phone died on me. Anyways, what I was saying was with the T90, I was talking about how it was basically created from the T72 platform, and how more or less, a lot of the came from the T72, but with more advanced technologies involved as far as like the whole computer system on board and the infrared. There's also a secondary weapon station similar to like that that's on the Chinese tank, like the Type 96B, as well as the Type 99 tank. There's also, let me see here, what I have written down. Oh, yeah. It uses the same engine as a T-72. Like, everything about it is the same as the T-72 B3M. So, yeah, it's basically, for all intents and purposes, it's more or less like the I guess the Russian equivalent of what you would think the T90, or I'm sorry, the Type 96B would be for China, and like the M1 would be like for us, like the M1A2. It's basically like Russia's equivalent. The the T90MS is for Russia, what the Type 96B is for China, and the M1A2 is for us. But Russia has an even better tank now. Oh yeah, before I go there, let me see here. Yeah, I wrote this with pencil. Y'all bear with me. It has, yeah, it's got 370 miles as far for its. I'm sorry, 340 miles without is its range without the external fuel tanks, and with the external fuel tanks, it's got like 370 miles range, which is quite a large range. It's got a large range. It's just a heavy tank, and it's fairly slow at only 37 miles an hour. So that's its top speed, 37 miles an hour. It's not very fast at all, and that's its road speed. So it's a very slow tank compared to the T-72, which is where it was basically came from. It's a slower tank, and it's basically the development that came off of the T-72. So the T-90 is one of Russia's two newest tanks, sort of like the Chinese two newest tanks, or the Type 96 and also the Type 99 series of tanks. And Russia's newest tank, their most high-tech tank by far, is the new T-14 Armata. That, I would say, compares a lot to China's newest tank, the Type 99A, which is the latest iteration of the Type 99 from the original plain Type 99 nomenclature. For Russia, they have the T-14. Now, there's not a lot of information on this tank, as I said at the beginning, but I'll do my best to read off what I was able to find out about it. They have a remote-controlled turret. Like, the whole turret's remote-controlled. Everything from the autoloader, the traversing of the turret. It also can automatically acquire targets and track targets. It has a target tracking system, much like some of the like the T-90 does, and other tanks do, other modern tanks. It even uses infrared resistant paint. Like, it has like the type of like the paint that they use on stealth planes. It basically uses the same type of paint that's on stealth aircraft to basically hide it from IR rays, like IR to hide its IR signature. Ugh. And I'm trying to articulate this the best way I can. It's early, but yeah, it uses IR paint to hide its IR signature, and it even this is kind of weird about a tank that I've never heard of before. It's even got a toilet in the separate crew cabin in the hull. It's only got 3 crew members who all sit in the hull of the tank, as the turret is essentially a self-contained unit where the ammunition is stored, and all the guns on it are basically remote-controlled guns. everything from the main gun as well as the machine guns, even the 12.7 millimeter on top. It's all remote. Everything's done by remote from the hull, and it's all highly computerized. It's got a lot of new computer systems in it. It's got a diesel double charger engine with 1900 horsepower, and it's estimated to have a range of about 310 miles or so. And the road speed it's given a pretty fast road speed at about 50 miles an hour. That's its estimated road speed. And I wasn't really able to find many additional details about it, but you can assume that it's going to probably have a lot of the same things that, I don't know, maybe the Chinese Type 99A would have, or maybe even a few more tricks of it up its sleeve, a little bit separate from all that. But yeah, they're really starting to up the game on the tanks, and I'm talking about our two biggest enemies are China and Russia. They've both really surpassed the United States when it comes to tank development. Russia with its T-14, and I'd even say there's things on the T-90MS that surpass the M1A2, like the active protection systems and such, the computerized systems. It can be said, as far as the T-90MS, that the fire control system it has is one of the best in the world on the T-90 already. So it's comparable to the Chinese ISFCS 212 that's on the Type 96B, which is also a very, very advanced fire control system. And plus, Russia has a system that can jam ATGMs, including like the javelins and such. If people weren't noticing, which I'm sure most people haven't noticed, but there were a few Russian units that did field the Type 90 tanks, and the Ch1na is the ATGM jamming system that's on the Type 90 MS tank, and it actually has proven to be pretty effective, at least for those units fielding those tanks, at basically making those ATGMs ineffective. Now, that aside from all the other issues with the javelins, like the power packs not being fully charged and everything else, I mean, there's a whole number of factors that contribute to why that didn't go so well for that conflict, but that's another story for another day. But as far as the ATGM jamming capabilities of the Ch1na, the units fielding the T-90 MS tanks have seen some pretty good success with its use. Now, the same can't really always be said for the T-72 B3Ms, but what they did do with those is they learned how to put additional armor plating on top of those tanks to give them sort of like our Tusk system on our M1 Abrams, how that was made to basically stand up to infantry launched anti-tank weapon systems like shoulder-mounted, like old school RPGs or fire and forget systems, similar to like the German Panzerfaust 3s and the American AT4s and the British NLAW, all those systems. Now, the Russians did similar by putting more explosive reactive armor, but on the very top of the tank to protect it from those types of systems that attack at a sort of a 45-degree angle, like the NLAW and the basically the Javelin in particular, but also from more primitive designs, as like being fired from the tops of buildings, sort of like the American Tusk tank armor system, which is additional applique armor for like the tops and sides and all the vulnerable points on a tank. Now remember, again, tanks are made for maneuver warfare. So really in this day and age, any tank has the ability to kill any other tank with the types of ammunition that's out now, the types of capabilities even being put into some of the older tanks, like how the Chinese really upgunned and up computerized and up armored their old stuff, as well as their newer stuff being like cutting edge technology, as far like with the Type 96 and Type 99 variants that are out. As well as like the Russian tank, newer variants of the T-72, T-80, T-90, and now this new T-14 Armata with all these new innovations on it, like the IR signature, the IR camouflage paint. That is it's pretty new development. We'll have to see how that works. I'm sure it'll work pretty well for a lot of the IR sensors on other tanks to confuse them or trick them, because that's a pretty wise decision, and I think you're going to see that end up becoming common on a lot of other tanks. I think you're going to see a lot of other countries start to develop tanks like that or paint tanks in similar fashions, with that in mind, with camouflaging it from sensors and such. Now, like on the Chinese tank, they have the laser scrambling system that can basically, jam laser signatures, laser signals, like from the M1 Abrams and other tanks that would want to kill it on the battlefield. Basically any sort of a Western tank, it could scramble the lasing. That would be a similar concept in a way to that, only it's with paint, using paint to disguise it from being able to be seen through IR equipment. But there's a lot of ways that tanks are starting to integrate newer concepts and technologies into them, and it's because you've seen it really happen with the older tanks being refreshed and brought back to life with integrating newer systems into them. So if they're integrating common systems into older models of tanks like the T-72 or like the Chinese Type 59D or the Type 69s and 79, Type 69, 79s tanks and so on and so forth, then if they're making those older tanks become fully capable of being killers again in mobile warfare with the new types of ammo, with the standoff weapons that give them extra range, like the anti-tank guided missiles that can be launched from the bore because the bores support ATGMs, then you're going to see the newer tanks house even more innovations like the T-90MS and like the T-14 Armata for Russia. And then in China, you got your T-90 or your Type 96 and your Type 99 iterations of tank. Now, that's what I was saying in the last Technical Tuesday. We either need to make a third iteration of the M1 Abrams series of tanks, or we just need to build a whole new battle tank to be able to keep up with our enemies. Because with Russian and Chinese innovations, if their older upgraded stuff can crush our M1 in maneuver warfare, because all they really need is a hit with an ATGM or a depleted uranium shell, or hell, even the Russian types of tungsten sabot rounds they have anymore are so effective and they can perforate the armor with a close enough hit that the tungsten ammo that Russia is producing now can easily shred through the Abrams and kill its whole crew, especially with the hull hit. All it has to do is hit in the hull of the tank from the side or even from the front. A front hit in the hull will kill an Abrams because all they need to do is kill the driver and then the tank's disabled. And then other tanks can just maneuver around it, hit it from the side or hit it from the back and destroy it. So that is why Americans think that the Abrams is a lot better than what it really is. Yes, it is a good tank. It is a good tank. I'm going to say it's a good tank, but the Iraqis didn't know the first things about armored warfare, about mobile armored warfare. They also didn't know about mutual supporting elements, like how to use real artillery instead of using your tanks as artillery. No, you use real artillery to support your tanks. Like, that's what self-propelled guns are for, to support the armor and the infantry. And you use infantry along with armor to be a mutually supporting element. And you also have air support. All of that gets really complicated when you don't have air support, when you don't have basically combined arms doctrines working in a proper way. That is when tanks become easy to kill, because if you don't have air support or air superiority, then everything just falls apart. Or if you, I mean, even if you didn't have air superiority, at least if you had good air defense, you could maybe still make it work, where artillery, infantry, and tanks could all work together in harmony. But once you lose air superiority, where the enemy controls the skies, and if you don't have good air defense to counter that, then it all starts to fall apart, because your enemy's tanks, planes, helicopters, infantry, artillery are all going to work in concert against you. But you see, the thing that the West is finding out about Russia and China is they have very, very potent air defenses, very potent air forces, and very, very humongous tank fleets and artillery forces, and even bigger mechanized infantry formations than anybody could imagine, especially China. China's like vastly bigger than everybody in the world militarily, as far as conventional militaries go. But yeah, Russia also has a pretty big conventional military in terms of equipment numbers. And if you take their personnel, if you count reserves with their active duty, they're definitely a big military. They're bigger than ours is. If you take the 3.2 military they have and our 2.2, they're a million bigger in military. And then when you add their other 300,000 paramilitary, which are basically like their National Guard but paramilitary internal troops, that's another 300,000. So they're like 1.3 million personnel larger than we are. And they have a lot more main battle tanks than we have. They have double the main battle tanks we have. Russia does, just Russia. Because remember, we put 400 Abrams tanks in storage. So we have like 6,330 main battle tanks right now that aren't being like stored away indefinitely as far as we're aware, because when the Marine Corps put those in storage, they didn't originally anticipate needing to pull them out. Of course, they probably will need to, now that our enemy's tank fleets and their forces are becoming more and more menacing to us. Yeah, they're going to need all the Abrams tanks that they can get. And it's not like they're going to be able to build a whole lot more as our country goes broke, as the resources don't become available, as we only have one tank factory compared to China, who has hundreds, and compared to Russia, who, well, they've got more than a few dozen. And that's see, we only have just barely over 12 major factories, and all the rest of our armaments factories are cottage industry type of places. They're not these gigantic places like basically that China has or Russia has. They're like, we only have like just over a dozen major armaments production plants. One of those is a tank factory, and that's it. That's it. China has hundreds. Russia has at least a few dozen, if not, I don't know exact Russian factory numbers. I would have to really look into that. I know it's nowhere near as big as China's, because they just don't have the same industrial base. It's not even close. I mean, they don't even produce anywhere near as much steel as China, but they're a lot closer in steel production to like our level. But they probably have a lot more factories as far as arms manufacturing than even we do. Because Russia is able to, they're able to maintain a pretty sizable military, and their munition stockpiles are pretty big. They're definitely second biggest after China. China's total tanks, if you take their main battle tanks of 19,300 and combine it with their 3,800, and that's all their tanks, all their storage numbers that are maintained tanks that go with units, that go with actual reserve or paramilitary forces, and also their active tank numbers. If you take China's total, 19,300 main battle tanks, and combine that with their 3,800 light tanks. Yeah, you definitely have a massive tank fleet there, and then you add Russia's 12,500 to that. Yeah, and against our 6,300 something. Yeah, we're woefully ungunned. So in maneuver warfare doctrines, which Russia and China regularly train their forces in, do you really think that one of our little new woke tank crews is going to be as effective as a gung-ho Chinese or Russian tank crew? I mean, it doesn't even matter, as far as like, as long as an army is not using their tanks incorrectly, they have just as much of a chance with an older T-72 that's been upgraded to kill our Abrams as we have with an Abrams to kill their T-72. And it's all that's when it comes down to the training of the individual tank crews. If you have a Russian or a Chinese tank crew that's been training diligently, training often in mobile warfare, and then you have a woke tank crew from the American woke military, this new generation of these Call of Duty woke generation of green, inexperienced troops that doesn't barely train at all. Yeah, I mean, it becomes pretty apparent who's going to be better at mobile warfare. So, and that's not just that; it's a lot of other areas too. But I'm just talking about tanks in this stream. I think you all already know how I feel about the whole across the board issue aspect of it. But yeah, again, if these older tanks, if used properly, can defeat Western tanks, then you know that Russia and China are going to use their older, up-gunned, up-computered, up-engined, and up-armored tanks to do so in a war, along with all their newest designs, which are either every bit as good or better than what we have as far as the M1A2 goes. So we're already outnumbered by both Chinese and Russian cream of the crop tanks, like the Russian T-80 UMs and their their T-90 MSs and now their new T-14 Armatas, and then you throw in China's 5,000 or so Type 96s and their 2,500 Type 99As. And also their 1,800 Type 88Cs, sometimes also called a Type 85, but that's, it's neither here nor there. They have a lot of names for that series of tanks, but you have all these tanks outnumbering what we have, with still the older up-gun stuff there to worry about too, all being used in maneuver warfare against us by modern, up-to-date militaries. It just goes to show you that we're in deep trouble. Very, very deep trouble. We have let ourselves go too much. We haven't been developing new designs to replace older designs, which can be easily defeated by now, by enemies who are rolling out newer designs made specifically to defeat our designs. Also, with their older stuff being able to defeat our stuff too. So we really, really need to get on top of replacing some of these older designs. Like I said, we either need to make a new iteration of M1 tanks, or we need to create an entirely new platform completely, altogether. But again, I just wanted to warn people with these technical videos, the dangers of our enemies and their developments. That's what these are all about, to show people, give them an idea of what it is we're facing and why, because I want people to see the technical specifications in order that they better understand what they're actually seeing when they watch my documentary videos where I have these units moving around on maps, or when they read my stories and they see some of the names of these things, they then know exactly what it is I'm talking about, and they understand some of the technical specs and why it matters. I hope you all enjoyed this. I know it was early for some, and I know that this one, I really wasn't on my really wasn't on my game with it. I mean, I got interrupted by a phone call, texting, and the phone died on me. But I hope everybody enjoyed this. So may Yeshua bless and keep you all always. Be blessed.